evening and welcome to a new episode of our program, The Daily Debate. I'm Yasmin Bakir. It's Wednesday evening. Tonight we are going to shed light on the TCAT 7 summit that's currently being held at the Japanese city of Yokohama with the participation of President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi, and as part of Egypt's input in this very important conference. Now, President al-Sisi headed to Japan to co-chair the TCAT 7 with Japanese Premier Shinzo Abe, and the frameworks, of course, in the efforts to bolster the strategic relationship between Egypt and Japan. Also, Egypt, as part of it being heading the African Union, speaks on the behalf of the African continent. And how can there be further cooperation and development between the African continent and Japan on all levels? We've seen files including health and education, technology, and of course, on all economic levels, we've seen further investment opportunities, particularly between Egypt and Japan. The president's trip is still ongoing in Japan. The conference or the summit is being held up until the 30th of August, and we will still be covering up on these updates here on Nile International. That's going to be our topic for today. Before we start, let's take a look at the latest top stories for this evening. Now, press release has been issued by the National Organization for the Social Insurance today concerning addition of special raises within the variable wages based on which the variable wage pension is calculated. The organization clarifies that it calculates the special raises that were not included in the basic wages in the calculation of the variable wages by 100% and not by 80%, as stipulated in the ruling referred to, and there are no pensioners for whom the organization has not added the special raises to their variable wages, based on which, of course, the wages or the pensions are actually being calculated. That is the top story for today. Hopefully we'll have further clarification on this important piece of news later this evening. Now, tonight we're going to be talking about the TCAT 7. This is the 7th summit, and Egypt is participating for the first time, and we need to know more about the president's speech earlier today at the opening inauguration of this summit in Yokohama in this morning report.
At the opening session of the 7th edition of the Tokyo International Conference on African Development, TCAT 7, held in Yokohama, Japan, President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi called on African countries and Japan to increase bilateral cooperation to benefit from Africa's natural resources. President al-Sisi stated that diversifying energy sources and supporting renewable and clean energy projects contributed to controlling the effects of climate change. He added that supporting Africa with development programs and state-of-the-art technologies to benefit from the continent's human and natural resources was essential to achieve the Africa 2063 Development Agenda goals and the 2030 Sustainable Development Goals. President al-Sisi also called on global private sector institutions, international companies, and financial institutions to invest in the Black Continent. The head of state stated that the development of African infrastructure, activating the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, and creating more job opportunities in the continent were the three main pillars to accelerate the transformation of Africa into an active strategic partner. As the current chairman of the African Union, President al-Sisi said he pinned hopes that TCAT 7 would achieve tangible results in furthering partnership between Japan and Africa. The TCAT conference aims at launching a new phase of strategic partnership between Japan and African countries based on mutual understanding, in addition to increasing Japan's contributions to Africa's development.
Welcome back. You're still watching us here on The Daily Debate, and we have joining us over the phone Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, former assistant to the foreign minister, who's going to shed further light on the importance and significance of TCAT 7 that is currently being held at the Japanese city of Yokohama. Thank you very much for joining us here, Excellency. Good evening.
Good evening. It's my pleasure.
We have been, of course, witnessing the opening session earlier today at Japan's time for the TCAT 7. We have witnessed a very crucial speech by President Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, the President of Egypt and the Chairman of the African Union. What does TCAT 7 add to the African continent?
Another very important event. I envy our president, really. He was in Japan a couple of weeks ago to attend the G20. He went also to France for the G7. Now he's back to Japan for the TCAT. Good effort in order to prove that the Egyptian foreign policy is everywhere, Egypt in the middle of everything, and Egypt, of course, is joining as the chairmanship of Africa. And there the president presented 2 points in his speech. First, that Africa is suffering from less investment and less trade, that Africa is the flow of money going from Africa towards the big powers is much more than the money coming from the big powers to Africa, because Africa is paying its foreign debts, it's paying its invoice of imports, and its exports do not cover its needs for imports. So the second point is, how do we see a solution for this? The solution is investment and more investment in fields where the donor is benefiting from his investments with the help of the Egyptian experience. And Egypt has a historical experience in Africa. We are the most accepted face to the Africans since Muhammad Ali Pasha, since Gamal Abdel Nasser, and now we have Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, who is traveling everywhere in Africa to prove that we are really in a position to support its aim for development and peace. So the formula now is what we call the tripartite cooperation. Donors from Europe, Japan, China, United States, the Arab world, on the African ground with the Egyptian experience, which is there, since we have the Egyptian Fund for Development in Africa. And we need more finance for such sort of fund.
Yes.
We need more agreements to protect and encourage investment in Africa. We want to make the system, the banking system in Africa, much better than today. The bureaucracy is killing any investment. We have to make an effort in order to do also our homework to make Africa more able to receive investment and foreign trade.
Yes, actually, building up on what you've correctly mentioned, Your Excellency, in terms of activating the strategic partnership between the African continent as a whole and partners like Japan, since we're currently witnessing the TCAT summit, I would like to specifically speak about important notes President el-Sisi did mention in his speech today when he spoke about development of Africa in African infrastructure, activating African continental free trade agreement, creating more job opportunities as 3 pillars to accelerate the transformation of the African partnership. How do you see this coming in terms of an actual plan that would be put on the table to work on? I'm speaking of cooperation between all the African continent to make this come true in order to activate partnership.
On one hand, we need the government support in order to establish new roads, new ports to receive big ships, to make Egypt Air and the airway companies to arrive to every capital in Africa. I was ambassador in Africa, and to reach my capital, it took me 3 days every time, while the distance is 2 hours if we take direct flight. If I am an investor, I wouldn't sacrifice 3 days in order to go to where I am investing. These things must be tackled. Also, bureaucracy and corruption in Africa, it must be tackled, and I am not talking here about stealing money. No, I am talking about bureaucracy, which makes your life very slow, and it makes money movement very slow. And a good investor wouldn't keep his money in the bank in order to wait until a decision is taken.
Yes, absolutely.
Many things on our side, our homework must be done in order to make Africa more able to absorb more and more flow of money for investment, for trade.
Yes, Your Excellency, if we're going to talk more about the chances of expanding further cooperation between Egypt and Japan in light of this visit, we know that tomorrow President Al-Sisi is expected to meet with the Japanese Minister of Investment, and there's a lot of investment opportunities, possibly memorandums of understanding on different levels that will be able to push forward with the Japanese investment in Egypt.
This is a very good point, and really I must say that I witnessed in the Foreign Office many signs that Japan looks to Egypt in a very positive way. I have seen one of the foreign ministers of Japan saying in Cairo in the Foreign Office that we are jealous, the Japanese, because Egypt is not using our money enough, and we are already there. Give us projects, give us studies, and we are there to finance. I have witnessed also the visit of the Prime Minister Abiy to Cairo, where he lectured us, and he showed to us a picture of the first delegation going from Japan to Egypt to see its industrial development in 1929, and the picture was showing this delegation at its premises. Now we have the president meeting the Prime Minister of Japan several times, and this is a good sign. As long as the dialogue is going on, we shall make the promises much more acceptable. We shall make the challenges much more to be solved. And this is really our homework, and we have to be very serious about taking this chance, attract a good partner like Japan.
Definitely. Your Excellency, Ambassador Gamal Bayoumi, former Assistant to the Foreign Minister, thank you very much for joining us on the Daily Debate. Now, the cooperation and the partnership between Egypt and Japan dates back 2 centuries. They have very strong strategic partnership and cooperation in general on all levels, not just on an economic and political level, but even on a cultural and social level. This following report is going to talk more about the partnership and cooperation between Egypt and Japan.
Egypt and Japan have traditionally enjoyed cordial relations. Considering Egypt to be a very important country for the stability of the Middle East, Japan regards these bilateral relations as the axis of its diplomacy in the region. These bilateral relations have steadily developed through increased political, economic, and cultural exchanges between the 2 countries. On the summit level, Japanese Prime Minister Shinzo Abe visited Egypt in January 2015, and President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi visited Japan in February to March 2016. Both leaders declared Japan-Egypt joint statement, which is considered to be the first step of the leap towards a new stage in bilateral relations between the 2 countries, as both leaders reiterated their willingness to continue to work towards promoting regional and international stability and development, and to further develop their strategic relationship, in particular in the fields of education, electricity, and health, through exchanging of agreements such as Egypt-Japan Education Partnership. Since then, the bilateral relationship between Japan and Egypt witnessed a new leap by enhancing the cooperation on education, human and cultural exchange, as well as on sustainable and comprehensive economic and social development. President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi said that Egypt looks forward to promoting economic and commercial relations with Japan via promising investment opportunities in the Egyptian market in various sectors. During a meeting with the chairman of the Japan External Trade Organization, al-Sisi reiterated that Egypt is keen on direct interaction with Japanese businessmen to review Egypt's capabilities, including trained labor and the free trade agreements linked with Arab, African, and European countries.
Welcome back again. You're still watching us here on the Daily Debate, and we're still covering up on the TCAT 7 summit that is currently taking place at the Japanese city of Yokohama between the 28th and the 30th of August, with the participation of Egyptian President Abdel Fattah al-Sisi. To shed further light on the significance of this summit, how can it be beneficial and crucial for the development of the entire African continent, we're joined over the phone by Dr. Noha Bakr, Professor of Political Science. Thank you for joining us. Good evening, Doctor.
Good evening. It's a pleasure to be with you.
Doctor, this is definitely another great achievement for Egypt on all levels to be taking part at the TCAT 7 meeting in Yokohama. Before that, President Sisi was in Biarritz in France, also taking part in the G7 summit. What does that signify in terms of the Egyptian position to the world?
Well, Egypt is representing the African Union, as it's chairing the African Union at the moment. So our president is there to represent not only Egypt, but to represent the 55 African countries, to talk about their aspiration. How can the African countries reach the agenda of 2063? How can the strong countries support African countries in their development in cooperation with also the UN agenda of 2030. In this respect, President Sisi will be having his speech, having meetings to discuss bilateral issues, as well as also issues regarding the African continent as a whole.
If we're going to talk about the important files that is topping the agenda of the summit, we know they're going to be discussing sessions concerning strengthening partnership between Japan and the African continent in the fields of education, health and investment. What are the priorities that the African continent needs right now?
Well, all what you've mentioned are priorities. Building human capacities in education and health is a priority. And there has been cooperation between Japan and Egypt that could be exemplary, and also Egypt can transform and support all these initiatives. As we've seen, Japan has, in Egypt, built Abu Rish Hospital for children. They have built the Opera House. They have invested in the Grand Museum. They have the schools for children, the Japanese schools. They have the Japanese universities. All these experiences, with the support of the Japanese and with the experience of Egypt, could be transformed to the African countries. So by this, there could be all kind of cooperation in supporting, building the human capacity, which will enable the economic situation to be better. And when the economic situation and development is sustained, this can help in the security of the countries and the stability of the countries, which is essential for the security of the worldwide.
Yes, and Dr. Noha, finally, Japan is well known for its advanced technology and has a lot of successful models when it comes to strengthening its economy. If we're going to talk about Egypt and how can Egypt benefit from the Japanese experience and expertise through this summit, what can you tell us?
Well, we have above 800 million investments, Japanese investments in Egypt that could be increased. Also, Egypt will be explaining how there could be further cooperation when it comes to investment, what reforms on the economic level have existed in Egypt and can attract private Japanese investment, but also not only to Egypt but to Africa as a whole, in building the infrastructure, in technology, in various aspects that could be supportive to Egypt as well to the continent.
Dr. Noha Bakr, Professor of Political Science, thank you very much for joining us here on the Daily Debate this evening. And we're going to go out for a short break. My guest is going to be joining me here in the studio to shed further light on the TCAT 7 summit. Please stay tuned.